The Straits of Patras were still dark when a ripple of oarwash reached the half-sleeping watchman on the Venetian flagship Real. A briny wind carried the smell of pitch, sweat, and anxious prayer. Above, Orion's belt glittered like 3 steel rivets hammered into a velvet hull. Then, on the eastern horizon, the first ember of dawn caught something monstrous. Row upon row of lateen sails, each varnished crimson, each emblazoned with a crescent so large it seemed the very moon had shattered and fallen in shards across an army of masts. To the west, another apparition materialized. White crosses stitched on square sails, bronze cannon mouths peeking through painted gun ports, the papal standard snapping beside Spain's golden castle and Leon's rampant lion. 2 civilizations, 2 centuries of rivalry, condensed into 2 lines of galleys converging at a choke point no wider than a pilgrim's hope. Somewhere in those ranks, a Morisco slave whispered, "Allah." A Florentine gunner fingered rosary beads, and 30-year-old Don Juan of Austria, imperial bastard turned admiral of a makeshift Holy League, recited Psalm 27. "Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear." His opposite, Muezzin Zadeh Ali Pasha, read from the Surat an-Nasr. "When the victory of God has come and conquest, then exult and ask forgiveness." Neither man imagined that within 6 hours, the Gulf of Corinth would be so clotted with wreckage, bodies, and shredded canvas that gulls could walk from spar to spar without touching water. The Battle of Lepanto was about to begin, and the Mediterranean, Rome's old pond turned Ottoman highway, would boil like a cauldron of prophecy. Long before the rumble of cannon echoed across the Ionian Sea on 7th October 1571, a subtler clash had been brewing in counting houses, chancelleries, and chancels from Cadiz to Cairo. The Ottoman Empire, stretching in an uninterrupted scimitar from the Danube to the Persian Gulf, taxed the spice routes and harvested the manpower of 20 vassal provinces. Its new sultan Selim II, known derisively in European courts as the Sot for his love of Cypriot wine, nonetheless inherited a navy sharpened by 3 generations of maritime expansion. His Capudan Pasha, Muezzin Zadeh Ali, commanded some 230 galleys and galeots. Low, sleek predators propelled by captive oarsmen and seasoned by decades of coastal raids. Yet it was the loss of Cyprus's last Venetian bastion, Famagusta, and the flaying alive of its commander Marco Antonio Bragadin that fused European outrage into a rare alloy of cooperation. Pope Pius V, a flinty Dominican with the stare of an inquisitor and the lungs of a drill sergeant, spent 2 years cajoling Habsburg Spain, the Republic of Venice, and a quiver of minor Italian duchies into a martial novena he called the Holy League. Trust among partners was thinner than the parchment. Venice dreaded Spanish dominance in the Adriatic. Spain feared funneling silver into a proxy fleet that might one day blockade Naples. And Genoa eyed Venetian trade monopolies with the same warmth a shark reserves for a seal. But the Pope sweetened piety with hard currency, underwriting half the league's rower costs and promising plenary indulgence to any man who lifted sword against the Turk. The fleet that finally assembled at Messina in September 1571 looked less like a unified armada and more like the world's angriest regatta. Venice supplied 109 state galleys plus 10 towering galeasses, hybrid gun platforms bristling with artillery fore and aft. Spain contributed 81 royal galleys, including the Real, the broad-beamed flagship outfitted with brass 9-pounders and a 400-man tercio of Castilian infantry. Don Juan of Austria, half-brother to King Philip II and veteran of the Morisco rebellions, accepted overall command after swearing before an altar that he'd obey the Pope's instructions to the letter, and then privately vowing to rewrite those instructions as circumstances required. Supplementing this corps were 12 vessels from the Knights of Malta, 4 from Savoy, 3 from the Papal States, and a colorful assortment of privateer frigates whose crews mixed contrite pirates with adventure-seeking nobles. Across the water, Ali Pasha assembled an armada equal in numbers but different in temperament. Ottoman galleys were narrower, faster, and crewed by free Muslim oarsmen alongside Christian slaves, a dual arrangement that could spur either zeal or sabotage depending on wind and fate. Heavy guns were fewer, but boarding parties were denser. Janissaries in quilted armor, Sipahis wielding composite bows, and Algerine corsairs who tucked poisoned daggers into their turbans. The Sultan's battle orders were simple: sweep the Christians from the Gulf of Patras, reopen the western doorway to the Adriatic, and prove that the loss of one island and the atrocities committed there were merely the price of doing empire. As September waned, storms whipped the Sicilian Strait. Don Juan drilled his polyglot crews in semaphore flag signals and firing salvos by whistle. Giovanni Andrea Doria, the Genoese cousin of famed corsair Admiral Andrea Doria, murmured that Spanish gunners fired too slowly and Venetian captains steered like gondoliers drunk on Prosecco. Venetian proveditors retorted that Doria's men drank more powder than they could afford to waste. Only one figure bridged the factions: Miguel de Cervantes, future author of Don Quixote, then a young arquebusier stationed on the Marquesa. He would later recall the dawn of Lepanto as the finest moment for mortals to see and for gods to remember. With Cyprus fallen, with Suleiman's shadow still looming from his gravesite in Budapest, and with Christendom's coffers bleeding into oak hulls and iron shot, two lines of destiny rode toward a rendezvous no astrologer could chart. In the holds, chained rowers dreamed of freedom. On the decks, officers dreamed of ransom. In Rome and Istanbul, two aging monarchs prayed that the sea would validate their version of providence. All that remained was the long pull toward the Gulf of Patras, where prophecy, powder, and politics would collide in the largest oared battle the world would ever know. The Holy League's departure from Messina on 16th September resembled a migration of steel-backed leviathans. Drumbeats set tempo for 40,000 rowers whose backs gleamed like wet teak under Sicilian sun. Sailmakers packed canvas tight around spars. Priests sprinkled salt water with aspergilla. Trumpeters blared La Marcha Real. They moved eastward in 3 columns, Venetian flagships under Agostino Barbarigo to port. The colossal center led by Don Juan aboard the Real, and Admiral Doria's Genoese-Spanish wing to starboard, each galley nose to tail like geese in martial formation. At night, lanterns hung from masts mirrored constellations, turning the dark sea into a duplicate sky. Inside Ottoman territory, minarets broadcast the muezzin's call to arms as Ali Pasha's fleet glided north from Lepanto, modern Naupactos. He organized his galleys into the classic crescent. Strong wings commanded by the fiery Algerine corsair Ulush Ali on the left, and the cautious Beylik governor Mehmed Sirocco on the right, while the center boasted the Sultana, a gilded flagship whose stern bore calligraphic Quranic verses promising triumph to those who submitted to divine will. His order of battle counted 34,000 sailors and oarsmen, 13,000 janissaries, and 2,500 archers whose quivers bulged with barbed shafts fletched in eagle feathers. By 6 October, Christian scouts sighted Turkish lookouts near Ithaca. Don Juan convened a midnight council aboard the Real. Participants gathered beneath swinging lamps. Old Fox Venetian Proveditore, Sebastian Veniero, Spanish Field Commander Alvaro de Bazan, Papal Envoy Marcantonio Colonna in spotless cuirass, and the ever-skeptical Doria fiddling with a silver pomander while calculating side bets on the venture's profit. They debated line length, galeass placement, and whether to unleash 6 fire ships rumored to be packed with tar-soaked pitch, but Don Juan concluded with austere clarity: "We stand, we fight, we win, or we see St. Peter before sunrise." As first light cracked on 7 October, the League fleet rode east through the narrows between the Echinades Islands and the Acarnanian coast. 5 galeasses were towed half a mile ahead, their broad beams mounting 44 heavy guns each, floating fortresses positioned to rake the Ottoman vanguard as it advanced. Venetian helmsmen dropped anchor to steady the gun platforms, then ran out long sweeps to pivot broadside. Gunners swabbed bores, loaded double-shot grape, and waited. At precisely 7:40 a.m., Turkish sails crested the horizon, first a scarlet lateen, then 100, then a forest. Drums thundered from the Sultana. Silver crescents at mastheads caught the sun, glinting like a swarm of rising suns. Christian captains hoisted battle flags, the crucified Christ on white for Spain, St. Mark's winged lion for Venice, the red 8-pointed cross for Malta. He meant. A sudden silence swept over both lines, broken only by gull cries and the groan of straining leather oar thongs. Then, as if an unseen cosmic helmsman shouted ramming speed, 2 civilizations surged forward. The galeasses fired first. Their portside culverins vomited iron that tore through advancing galley prows. One shot from the La Padrona decapitated the beak of Mehmed Sirocco's lead brigantine, splintering its keel and sending rows of Turkish oarsmen tumbling into blood-frothing surf. Yet momentum carried survivors onward. They clawed at the water with oars, desperate to close the gap where cannon could not bear. Venetian sharpshooters perched in the galeass rigging loosed arquebus fire, but janissaries screamed Allahu Akbar and returned volleys of arrows that hissed through sailcloth like hornets. At the league's left, Agostino Barbarigo steered his flagship Capitana into a melee of snapping oars and splintering spars. Mehmed Sirocco's right wing attempted to hug the shallows of the Greek coast to outflank the Venetian line. Barbarigo countermaneuvered, ordering galleys to shorten oars and pivot like door hinges to block the bypass. Waves churned into mud-brown froth as hulls ground against hidden sandbars. Boarding bridges clanged. Turkish sipahis vaulted onto Venetian decks, scimitars whirling. Barbarigo, visor up, hurled a pike into Sirocco's bosun, then caught an arrow through his eye slit. Mortally wounded, he fought on his knees until attendants dragged him below. But his captains closed ranks, swarming Sirocco's flagship. After 40 minutes of throat-to-blade combat, Venetian Marines hauled the Ottoman admiral over a rail and beheaded him on the spot, hoisting his head on a pike to signal local victory. To the starboard, Giovanni Andrea Doria faced Ulus Ali, the cunning Algerine corsair, nicknamed the Fox. Reading the Genoese's appetite for maneuver, Uluch feigned retreat southward, luring Doria away from Don Juan's center and opening a mile-wide gap. Doria pursued, unwilling to let the corsair sweep behind the Christian line. The chase stretched both wings thin like drawn bowstrings. At the critical moment, Uluk pivoted north, his galleys crossing the Christian rear and pouncing on the exposed Venetian support squadron led by the Capitana delle Galeazze. Cannon thundered, grappling hooks flew. Algerine janissaries overran the deck, slaughtering sailors and spiking guns. Uluch captured the flagship's banner, a triumph he would later present in Istanbul as proof that Allah delivered the cross into the crescent. In the heart of the battle, the behemoths collided like continental plates. The Real, 200 feet stem to stern, rammed the Sultana amidships. Iron beaks locked, oars shattered, hulls groaned. Don Juan donned a plumed morion, drew a broadsword modeled after Charlemagne's Joyeuse, and led a tercio of 300 Spanish infantry across a boarding bridge. They met a wall of janissaries wielding yataghans and Tisdar shields painted emerald green. The crush was so tight arquebuses were useless. Men fought with daggers, bucklers, and teeth. Overhead, musketeers in the fighting tops traded volleys through smoke that smelled of saltpeter and pitch. For half an hour, momentum seesawed. An Ottoman standard-bearer planted the green flag atop the Real's forecastle, only to be cut down by Miguel de Cervantes, who took 2 harquebus balls to the chest and a wound to the left hand that would maim him for life. Below decks, Christian galley slaves seized chisels, smashed shackles, and joined the melee, some for faith, others for the blind hunger of revenge. The turning point came when Don Juan's armor-bearer hauled a small culverin onto the boarding plank and fired point-blank into the janissary phalanx, blowing a human breach. Spanish pikemen surged, reached the Sultana's quarterdeck, and cut down Ali Pasha, whose jeweled turban rolled across the blood-slick planks like a fallen crown. A Spanish marine seized the admiral's severed head and hoisted it on a boarding pike, shouting, "Victoria!" The sight rippled panic through Ottoman ranks. Galleys near the Sultana attempted to disengage. Some collided. Others backed water, losing rams and oars. Even as the center crumbled, Uluch Ali regrouped. He hurled 10 reserve galleys into the Christian center rear, targeting the papal flagship Capitana di Santa Maria. Cannonballs punched through oak. Oars splintered into flying daggers. But Marcantonio Colonna rallied a counterboarding led by 200 papal guards in polished cuirasses. They fanned across enemy decks chanting the Salve Regina, spreading the psychological blade of religious zeal. Meanwhile, Venetian galeasses, freed from Ottoman harassment, re-engaged, firing canister that scythed through retreating Turkish ore banks in grisly curtains of red mist. By 2 p.m., the sea resembled an alchemist's nightmare. Charred timbers floated beside crimson slicks. Gun smoke formed low gray ceilings. Dismembered spars stuck upright in the swell like drowned flagpoles. Without Ali Pasha, the Ottoman center dissolved. Galleys turned turrets first to expose minimal target profile, rowing desperately south towards Santa Maura. Many bore decks piled with wounded 3 layers deep, a grisly ballast. Some Christian captains accepted surrender flags. Others, enraged by Cyprus and Bragadine, gave no quarter, firing close-range volleys that ripped begging men into ragged shreds. Contemporary estimates count 12,000 Ottoman dead, 3,500 Christian casualties, and 15,000 Christian galley slaves liberated, an irony not lost on survivors who had swapped one set of chains for another flag. Giovanni Andrea Doria, realizing his overextension, broke off pursuit and barreled north to aid the center. Seeing Ali Pasha's head displayed like a banner, Uluç calculated the battle lost. He corralled 40 surviving galleys, including the captured Venetian standard, and escaped westward using superior seamanship and the rising Mistral. Doria considered chase, but dusk brewed squalls, and Don Juan signaled recall. Though Uluç Ali lived to fight another day, the Ottoman dream of unchecked Mediterranean dominion died beneath that smoky sky. Night fell with a hush uncanny after so much violence. Survivors floated on door planks, reciting prayers or curses until rescue boats fished them out. Don Juan ordered lanterns hung from yardarms to guide lost swimmers. Venetian surgeons amputated limbs on blood-slick decks. Spanish priests gave last rites in 6 languages. Cervantes, delirious from fever, whispered lines he would later embed in the mouth of Don Quixote. Freedom, Sancho, is one of the most precious gifts the heavens have bestowed upon men. Stand today on the placid Gulf of Patras, and only sonar pings or the occasional fisher's net snag provide mute testimony to Lepanto's carnage. Yet the battle's resonance thrums through every subsequent chapter of Mediterranean history. Venice retained its trading colonies another century. Spain cemented its legend as champion of Catholic Europe. And the Ottoman fleet, though rebuilt in record time, never again ventured past Crete in full strength. More intangible but equally potent was the psychological pivot. The myth of Ottoman naval invincibility sank alongside the Sultana, while Christendom rediscovered the possibility of unity amid factional suspicion. Miguel de Cervantes called Lepanto the high point of all ages, even though it cost him the use of his left hand. For Pope Pius V, it was a rosary miracle. For Sultan Selim II, a costly lesson that sea-borne thunder could overturn the most ornate divan dreams. For us, the battle endures as a water-bound foreshadowing of modern coalition warfare, a laborious forging of alliances, a reckless leap of faith, and a revelation that technology, gallesses, gunpowder, boarding culverins, would henceforth tilt the trireme balance once held by muscle and oar. If the salt spray saga of Lepanto's clashing galleys fired your imagination, don't let the wave recede without leaving a wake. Share this voyage with a friend who loves untangling the knots of naval history. Subscribe right now to enlist in our weekly fleet of deep-dive documentaries, and sound off in the comments with the next battle. Nile, Tsushima, or Trafalgar. You want hauled from the depths. Smash that like button as hard as a galley broadside, and ring the notification bell so YouTube's algorithm can't scuttle your ticket to the next adventure. Because history, like the sea, rewards those who dare to row into the storm.